The DA says its first policy conference will focus on the values of the party and envision the role of government as the country faces multiple socio-economic ills. The official opposition will hold the policy conference virtually this weekend. The DA will tomorrow hold discussions about a sustainable development model, while the country's economic growth is expected to contract by 7.2% this year due to COVID-19. The conference was postponed in April due to the country's lockdown. And joining us now to talk about this weekend, big weekend for the Democratic Alliance, is political analyst Sabelo Chaufu. Thank you so much for talking to us today. I just want us to begin here. I mean, it's a big weekend for the Democratic Alliance, but when you look at the events of this week, it certainly has been scrambling to somewhat contain the narrative ahead of this conference.
Good evening, Bongiwe. Thank you for having me. Yes, look, this week has been somewhat difficult for the DA. And I don't know if it was intentional for Moody to resign when he did, but if it was, it definitely has put the DA on the back foot, especially insofar as dealing with some of the issues that have been raised and that keep festering for quite some time.
And of course, when you look at this weekend, certainly they talk about the fact that it's going to be the policy conference, but it's also going to be somewhat of a litmus test when it comes to its leadership race.
Yes, look, the fact is that it's not a unique scenario for a policy conference in a political party to take place before an elective conference. I guess the unique part here is that this is the DA's first, conference of such a nature in its history. Ordinarily, policies would be discussed at one forum, for instance, the Federal Council, and then at a later stage they would be discussed in brief in order to approve them at a Federal Congress. So this one is a bit different, and you do get a sense that it will be, in fact, a measuring stick, for the different factions, if you can call them that, to measure each other out on where they stand, about issues relative to each other.
And when we talk about, its members and where they stand on issues, they have, of course, we cannot ignore that big resignation that we saw this week, John Moody leaving the party, also citing that the party does not appear to be, accommodative of dissenting views. Certainly, this is not the first time we hear of a Democratic Alliance that does not accommodate dissenting views. How much of power do its members really have in deciding the way forward here and deciding what the party's policy direction is going to be, particularly when you're looking at the fact that there are, concerns even from those that have left the party to say that power does seem to lie somewhere else?
Yes. So one thing that you quickly understand, the more you go into understanding the DA's processes, is that power is, to a great extent, centralized. Yes, you have situations where it has found itself a decentralized party and power is ostensibly devolved. However, the decision-making structures then centralize the power base. And so, to the extent, to the point of how members on the ground, how much power members on the ground have, I would argue that members on the ground have a limited stake in power, simply because when you look at issues such as list processes going into elections, all of those things are designed in such a way that the persons or the bodies that have power favor incumbent persons. And so where you have scenarios where there are people who dissent against those incumbents, those incumbents generally they tend to have an ability to sway lists to the disadvantage of the dissenters. And in terms specifically of the dissenting views, what we have observed is that there is a freedom of expression that is generally accepted. However, in terms of application of the principle of freedom of expression, it is not all those who express themselves freely who, in fact, do not find themselves facing censure. More often than not, those who are perceived to be without power find themselves censored, and censored very quickly and harshly. Those who are perceived to have power, however their views might be problematic for the party in general and for the country in particular, they tend to then find themselves without having been censored. And if they are censored, it's a slap on the wrist.
So from what you're saying, then, is this a political party that is looking to protect the interest of a certain niche group or, a certain grouping, and not worrying about reaching more of South Africans, and in fact, that's moving towards inclusivity?
Well, I think that's a question for voters to decide for themselves. What I can say, though, freely, is that it is one thing for you to talk one game. It's another thing for you to act out that game. You need to put your money where your mouth is, as it were. I'm not entirely convinced that, in fact, the EA intends to do so. Yes, we have observed over a great deal of time, one thing that has attracted many people from across the board, across varying races, is what many have observed to be an openness to debate and all of those things, an openness to engage people who are different, who are from different backgrounds. However, what we have also then observed, all of us looking in, whether you've been inside, whether we've been outside, what many of us have observed, is that many of the very same people who the party has attracted, who the party has actively gone out and courted, have then had left. And when they've left, the message and the narrative is the same narrative, that what is sold and what is practiced are not the same thing. So ultimately, it's for voters to decide for themselves that do they believe, in fact, what the DA says. And that's not for me to decide. It's not for us to decide. It's for voters at the end of the day, having seen everything that they have seen for themselves.
And talking about having seen everything that they've seen for themselves, this week we saw the resignation of John Moody. Of course, this is not in isolation. In recent months, we saw Mmusi Maimane, resigning from that political party. We saw Herman Mashaba also letting go of his position as Johannesburg mayor and also resigning from the Democratic Alliance. Let's look at this latest resignation by John Moody. Is this something that the party can afford to ignore?
It's clearly not something the party can afford to ignore. And the evidence of this is in the quick response that they have had in response to Mr. Moody. What, however, is also somewhat unique in the case of Moody is that the censure and the attacks that have come onto Moody and Moody's person are very different in tone and in style to those that came beforehand. Insofar as they were related to Mashaba, to Maimane, and previously Delil, and all of those other people. And the difference, I would argue, is that when the party looks at Moody, as the party had looked at the other parties, the party sees in Moody a softer target, a target who they believe is easier to attack than it was for them to attack the other leaders. And so they've done so.
Should the party be doing some self-introspection? Well,
at the end of the elections last year, that's what the party's own review said the party must do. I'm not certain if what the party meant with the review was that this review is just introspection in totality. I certainly have never understood it to be that way. But to the extent that maybe they have been, one can argue that they believe they are done. Many of us, myself included, believe that, in fact, there's much more, introspection that the party needs to do. But a lot of that introspection that the party needs to do will go to the core of what the party actually stands for and what the party actually supports. I'm not convinced that the party, that many leaders who hold power right now in the party would be too keen to do that.